On today's Locked On Giants podcast, the Giants just don't need a solid offseason, but they need for some existing guys on the roster to really step it up in 2025 and beyond. We'll tell you who and why coming up next here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all my written work. And as always, welcome on in to my Blue Crew community members, my everydayers, my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And on today's show, we have some Giant players who, when we think of the Giants roster and the changes and the additions that the team needs to make to really get this team competitive, we're often forgetting about some of the guys already on the roster that need to step it up. Guys that, have either been progressing slowly or just not progressing at all. So we're going to talk about a few of those guys that the Giants really need to step up in 2025 and beyond if they are on the roster beyond 2025. So that'll be our first segment. And then in our second segment, I wrote an article. It's going to hit New York Giants on SI tomorrow, or I should say on Wednesday, about this quarterback conundrum. I was just thinking about, all the circumstances and what led up to this. And so I'm just going to share some of those thoughts with you in advance on the conundrum and basically, how I see this all kind of playing out. And then finally, Gano out. That's right. I'm going to talk a little bit about kicker Graham Gano. Not a guy that we talk about very often unless something's going on. And look, as the Giants get ready to fine tune their salary cap situation, not that they need to make any cuts, but good to take a look at Gano and is he a viable candidate to be a salary cap cut? So that is all coming up on today's program. Again, welcome on in to everybody. All right, let's go through the list of guys that I have that are already on the roster. They're established veterans, whether they're, 1 year in, 2 years in, 3 years in, whatever. These are guys that need to make a jump that I just don't think that they have given the Giants enough in terms of their performance for one reason or another. And I'm going to start with Deonte Banks, obviously, cornerback Deonte Banks. Now, statistically speaking, Deonte Banks, according to Pro Football Focus, was ranked 66th out of 73 cornerbacks in coverage. Right, that's based on 50% of the defensive snaps coverage played in coverage. 66 out of 73. Deonte Banks, remember, first round draft pick, not playing like one last year. He was ranked third out of the 4 New York Giants cornerbacks who had at least 100 coverage snaps when it came to playing zone. So, if you thought he struggled in zone coverage, you weren't seeing things. He really did. His statistics, 6 touchdowns given up this year versus 4 the year before. No interceptions this year versus 2 in 2023. 8 pass breakups in 2024 versus 6 in 2023. But the biggest issue with Deonte Banks, in my opinion, was the effort. I just felt, and I think it was on display for everybody to see, that when Deonte Banks got frustrated, he basically kind of just threw up his hands and said, whatever. And you can't have that. So for me, look, the statistics, certain things can factor into the statistics. I'll allow for that. But what I won't allow for is you can't get frustrated if, you make a mistake. You've got to grow up. You've got to own your mistakes. And you've got to work to get better. And that's where I think Deonte Banks fell short in his second season last year. So I'd like to see him maybe grow up a little bit more, be more mature, approach the game more like a seasoned veteran, which he will be next year and not pout or throw up his hands and say, okay, I give up if stuff doesn't go his way. All right. Next guy, Evan Neal. Obviously, this is a first round draft pick who is not, for whatever reason, played like a first round draft pick. All right. Now, part of it is, the more we watch him, the more it's convincing that he is not a tackle at this level. He should be a guard. Evan Neal is entering the final year of his contract. And what I don't want to see the Giants do is stubbornly stick with him at tackle. And then, they say, oh, okay, we're not picking up his fifth-year option. We're not going to re-sign him. And then he goes off to another team that has the common sense to move him to guard. And now all of a sudden he's serviceable. Don't want to see that happen. So this is a big year, I think, not just for Neal, but also for the Giants, because stop compounding a mistake here. It's pretty clear. And I don't want to hear, oh, he's been injured. Oh, this has happened. That has happened. He's had multiple offensive line coaches, whatever the case may be. Do what's best for the young man. And at the same time, do what's best for the team. And I just don't think that, they have done that when it has come to Evan Neal. So he's somebody who really needs to step up and deliver the goods in 2025. Kayvon Thibodeaux is up next. Now, Thibodeaux, he's interesting. I understand he had the missed games this year, but he also had 8 missed tackles, which was his highest in his career. He had only 20 stops, which were the lowest total in his career. And again, this is per Pro Football Focus. 35 pressures and 6 sacks in last season. Now, people will say, well, he missed some games. But see, here's the problem I have with Kayvon Thibodeaux's game. And by the way, I do think they will pick up his 5th-year option. I would be surprised if they don't. But here's the problem I have. He was on the field with Brian Burns, who was pretty good, and Dexter Lawrence, who's pretty good. Okay? To me, Kayvon Thibodeaux should have been a little bit more productive with those guys on the field with him. The whole hope was that by adding Burns to the equation, it would create a pick your poison type of situation for opposing offenses when it came to defending the Giants' pass rush. That wasn't really the case this year. The problem with Thibodeaux is I don't think he has enough moves in his pass rushing arsenal. I think if he develops a few more moves, he's going to really, be able to live up to the expectations. But right now, if you're saying he's probably like a top 10 draft pick, I don't think I would quite agree with you there. I think he's got the potential to do it, but just I've got to see more from him in order to say, yeah, he's a guy that we want to move forward with. And then I'll give you one more stat that I found kind of interesting. I looked at his stats versus those of Azeez Ojulari. The pass rush productivity rating. Thibodeaux had 338 pass rush snaps, 6.6 PRP. Azeez Ojulari, who's an unrestricted free agent this offseason, had 195 pass rushing snaps, 7.7 PRP. So he did more with fewer snaps. That's why I say, folks, Thibodeaux's got to pick it up moving forward. Okay, another guy that I want to talk about real quick, John Michael Schmitz, the center. Now, Schmitz, his trajectory is slightly going up. He hasn't been horrible. He did not allow any sacks in the first 6 games of the season when the offensive line was intact. But he did allow 39.2% of his pressures in the first 6 games. All right, that per Pro Football Focus. He gave up 1 more sack than he did in 2023. And I still remain concerned about that shoulder issue that he's had now twice in 2 successive years. So Schmitz, I think, the outlook for him is positive, but I'd like to see a little bit more from him in terms of physicality, in terms of, staying healthy. I mean, the durability is starting to become a concern in my book. Just, I think there's more to his game. And I think, hopefully this year we'll see them bring that out of him when they get him on the field. All right, coming up next, I'm going to talk more about Matthew Stafford and just the Giants quarterback situation in general, and some feedback that I've gotten from you guys and gals about Matthew Stafford. So stick around and I'll tell you all about it right after this. This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. If you are waiting and wondering and worrying if you're going to get any money back on your taxes, worry no more. Get matched with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. Your TurboTax expert will give your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so that you can focus on your day. Your expert will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. There's no waiting, no wondering, no worries. That's how taxes are supposed to be. So go on and get an expert now with TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at turbotax.com/guarantees. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. Coming up later this week, I've got a couple guests that I'm working to have. I think one I'm going to definitely have for sure. I'll tell you more about it a little later on in the week, but it has to do with the Giants sale of the 10% ownership. It's just something a little different. I know a lot of you had some questions about that. So I've got a guest coming on that I think is going to be able to answer some of those questions. And then we're also going to do a preview of the combine because the scouting combine is next week. And it's going to be a very busy and news-filled week, I think, for the Giants. So we'll do a little preview on the players, what to watch. And of course, next week, I'll have total coverage of the combine for you, recaps of rumors, all kinds of stuff. So keep it here on the Locked On Giants podcast. All right, let's talk about Matthew Stafford. Now, I've been talking about him on other shows, but I got to thinking, because some of you are saying to me, I don't want Matthew Stafford. If the Giants trade for him, they're crazy because they're going to have to extend him. They're going to have to do this. They're going to have to do that. Folks, in thinking about this, the Giants kind of put themselves into this corner. All right. Never mind the fact that, the Daniel Jones contract, which they kind of had to do, where the Giants went wrong, and I will maintain this until, somebody tells me otherwise or proves me wrong otherwise, where the Giants really went wrong was last year when they did not take a quarterback. All right. Now, you've always heard me say, don't force a pick, because if you force a pick, you're going to set yourself back. But you've also heard me say on this program that it wouldn't hurt to take a flyer on a guy. And I realized, if they had drafted Spencer Rattler, a guy that I was kind of banging the table for a little bit, that would have meant maybe not having a Tyrone Tracy or a Darius Muaso, or, maybe even a Theo Johnson. I get that. But by not addressing and bringing in a young quarterback to develop, now they're starting from scratch with the quarterback room. They are in a position where now their owner, or one of their owners, John Mara, came out and basically said, I don't know how much more patience I could have with this rebuild process. Well, you know what? The Giants are now in a sticky situation. And here's why I say that, I'd be stunned if the Stafford trade doesn't really pick up steam, right? The Giants, if you look at their opponents next in 2025, they've got the AFC West and the NFC North. Well, guess what, folks? 3 teams from each of those divisions went to the playoffs this year. Then you throw in the NFC East. 2 teams, the Eagles, who are the defending Super Bowl champions, and the Commanders went to the playoffs. That is a bad schedule for a team that does not have an answer at quarterback. So when you have your co-owner saying, I don't know how much more patience I can have with this rebuild, that kind of paints the GM in a corner, because now you have to go out. You have to get a veteran. You have to get the best possible veteran, a guy who has won you some games, or not won you some games, a guy who has won some games, a guy who has been clutch, a guy who, you'd like to think is still got some gas left in his tank. And you're basically going to have to pay for him, whether it be draft picks and money, which in this case for Stafford would be the case, or whatever the case may be. You're going to have to pay because you were short-sighted. You decided, okay, hey, we're going to run it back with Daniel Jones when, Jones was not only coming off the knee injury last year, which I get, but, they had a chance to maybe get something done with Russell Wilson. And I think they would have gotten something done with Russell Wilson had they not insisted that, oh, when Daniel Jones is healthy, he's our starter. That's where the Giants went wrong. All right. So they kind of created this whole conundrum at quarterback between not drafting a guy or even signing a guy out of that class last year and not, having a competition, which, supposedly they're supposed to have competitions at every position, but they didn't last year. So now you've got that brutal schedule that's coming up, or that schedule of opponents, I should say. You have, the pressure on you to win some more games than you did the last 2 years when you won 3 last year and 6 the year before. So, there's really no other way to do this. Are you going to say, oh, okay, we're going to put all our eggs in the basket of a rookie quarterback this year when you've got 2 guys at the top of the draft class? And let's throw in, Jackson Dart, who I think is like the 3rd rated quarterback in the class. When you've got Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, Jackson Dart, all of whom who have flaws, all of whom who, nobody can seem to agree is a surefire, can't miss Caleb Williams type or Jaden Daniels type or Drake May type. Doesn't that make you a little bit nervous if you're the Giants, to where you say, okay, you know what? Let's just get a veteran in here to do the heavy lifting against this brutal schedule, hope that we could stay afloat. If we draft a quarterback, great. We'll get him ready. Hopefully he'll be ready for next year, 2026, if not before that. We'll see how 2025 goes. But the Giants, basically, like I said, they have put themselves in a corner because of how they handled the quarterback situation last year. It's coming back to bite them. And, again, nobody's going to try and convince me otherwise. That's what I firmly believe, that they could have handled that quarterback situation a lot differently. And look, some of you might say, well, they owed it to Daniel Jones after what happened. Daniel Jones wasn't playing that well before that knee injury. And I get it. They said, well, Brian Daboll, he could fix him. Did Brian Daboll fix him in the 10 games that he started? Some games Jones looked okay, and some games he didn't. But did Jones ever look like somebody that could elevate the talent around him? No. Which would be another concern I would have. Because thus far with the Giants, you could say that Daboll has had a mild effect on Daniel Jones, although in retrospect, go back and look at who gained 29% of the Giants' offensive yards in 2022. It wasn't Daniel Jones. It was Saquon Barkley. All right. You could say, well, Tommy DeVito, had that run. Great on him. But how much of that, let's ask ourselves, how much of that was a result of teams really not having any film of DeVito in the Giants offense and just needing to kind of develop a feel for what he could do and what he couldn't do in that offense? You have to take that into consideration. Now, I'm not saying that Daboll can't develop a quarterback. Not at all. I'm not saying that at all. But that being said, even if they do take a quarterback in the first round, and right now, I'm not convinced that's how they're going to go. Maybe I feel differently after the combine. But right now, that's not how I feel. Maybe they get a guy and he turns into somebody who could be just as good as a Jaden Daniels was for the Commanders this year. So we'll have to see. But the bottom line, folks, the Giants put themselves in this mess with a quarterback situation. So now, unfortunately, they're going to have to pay through the nose to fix it if they want to keep their jobs. All right, coming up next, Graham Gano. Is Graham Gano a realistic salary cap casualty candidate? We'll talk about that right after this. Hey, Giant fans, when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game so that even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. The app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And let's talk a little salary cap here. I know a lot of you like to, like the salary cap segments that I do. And this one's kind of interesting. I have said that I think Joaquin Nunez-Roches is a salary cap casualty candidate for the Giants. And I know Graham Gano's name has been floated around there too as a possible candidate. And initially I was like, nah, I don't see them doing that. They need a kicker, and kickers are so hard to come by, especially reliable kickers. But then I went and I said, you know what? Let me take a little bit of a deeper dive to see, if Gano's production matches his value. And it really doesn't. And I get it. He's had injuries the last couple of years, which is another concern in itself. But here's some numbers for you. Okay. His 81.89 field goal percentage was the fourth lowest in seasons in which he has played 10 games in his career. Okay. He had a 64% conversion rate on field goal attempts of 40 plus yards. That includes a breakdown of 0 for 3 on 50 plus and 11 of 14 on 40 to 49. You know what? That's not good, folks. That's not good because a lot of field goals are from that distance, 40 plus. And if you only have a 64% conversion rate, geez, I don't know how you can justify, a $5.665 million cap hit. So given that, and also given, I won't even go with the kickoff issues because I thought prior to the dynamic kickoffs, I thought Gano's kickoffs were starting to lose a little bit of oomph, if you will. I don't know that he's worth the $5.665 million. Now, if the Giants were to move on from him, they would save $3.165 million. Now, could they restructure the deal? Sure, they could. Should they? I don't think they should. I think Gano's 37 years old, if I'm not mistaken. I think he's 37. So yeah, I don't think I would restructure his deal. Actually, I think Gano's going to be 38. I'm sorry. He's going to be 38 in April. So yeah, I don't think I would restructure that deal. What do they do with kicker then? Can Jude McIntyre, who is signed to a reserve futures contract, could he be the guy? I would give him a lot of work this spring if they carry him into the spring and the summer. I would look to get another kicker on board to compete if I move on, if they move on from Gano. So, I don't want to ding a guy because he's had injury issues, but these are all business decisions that need to be considered. And, when Gano was first signed, he was Mr. Automatic. You never had to worry about Gano when he was on the field, when he was first signed by the Giants, because every kick was just about stress-free. These days, these last 2 years, when he has been in there, not so much. So I think it's a legitimate, question to ask if you're Joe Schoen. Do you want to move forward with Gano. I don't think he would take a pay cut to stay with the Giants. I think he would probably want to gamble on himself. So, if you're saying, oh, just give him a pay cut and give him a chance to make back some of the money that you take away through incentives, I don't know that he'd want to do that. I don't want to speak for the man, but my guess is, what I know of him, he's a pretty proud guy, takes a lot of pride in his craft. I just don't know that he would do that. So, look, they say kickers are a dime a dozen, but you got to find the right kicker. All right. Because if you don't, we all saw what happened the last couple of years with the kicking odyssey with this team. Now, the good news is there's always a kicker out there on the market, and sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes, you get another team's former kicker. I mean, look at Washington. I think Washington had got a kicker that had floated around. I want to say Washington's kicker was Zane Gonzalez, I believe. And Zane Gonzalez, yeah, he did pretty well for them, when all was said and done. So you can find kickers. There might be some guys that come out of the draft class that maybe you want to see if they can do the job. Maybe they go undrafted, you bring them into camp. But the more I look into this, the more I think it is possible that maybe, just maybe, the Giants move on from Graham Gano. And, we'll see if that topic gets addressed next week when Joe Shane speaks to the media at the Combine. We'll see if we can't get that question answered. But otherwise, Giants really don't have to do a whole lot in terms of the salary cap. Like I said, Raheem Nunez-Roches, I think, is definitely somebody they're going to move on from. We'll see if they move on from Graham Gano and who else they might decide to tweak. So, all right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. As always, thank you for spending part of your day with us here. Don't forget to tune in the rest of the week. We are still 5 days a week. And then don't forget to put it on your calendar. We have the Combine next week. The NFL tagging window opened up on Tuesday. Not that I expect the Giants to tag anybody, but that's something to keep an eye on as well. And a whole lot more coming up here on the Locked On Giants podcast. So we will see you tomorrow, Giant fans.